The coffee was still warm in Director Chen's hand when the impossible happened. At 11:47 a.m. on what had started as a perfectly ordinary Tuesday at the European Intelligence Coordination Center in Vienna, a figure materialized on the supposedly impenetrable 23rd floor balcony like smoke given form. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Security cameras would later show nothing but empty air 1 second and a crouched silhouette the next. But what shocked everyone most wasn't the breach itself. It was discovering that the ghost, who had just completed a classified infiltration mission that seasoned operatives had deemed suicide, was 22-year-old Bora Quin, the same woman they'd been laughing at for her amateur parkour tricks just hours before. The European Intelligence Coordination Center stood like a glass and steel fortress in Vienna's diplomatic district, its 30 floors housing some of the continent's most classified operations. On this sunny Tuesday morning, the building hummed with its usual rhythm of controlled chaos, encrypted communications buzzing through secured channels, analysts hunched over multiple monitors, and field operatives preparing for assignments that would never appear in any official record. The morning briefing room on the 5th floor buzzed with anticipation as 30 of Europe's elite intelligence operatives gathered for their weekly assignment review. Sunlight streamed through the bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across the polished conference table where classified folders lay in neat rows, each containing missions that could reshape international relations. Director Chen stood at the head of the table, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense reputation. At 53, she had earned her position through 2 decades of successful operations across 3 continents. When she spoke, even the most seasoned operatives listened. The wall behind her displayed a digital map of Europe, red dots marking current zones of interest, blue lines tracing surveillance networks that spanned from London to Istanbul. The center operated under a strict hierarchy that had been refined over decades. Senior operatives like Marcus Anderson and Sophia Laurent commanded respect earned through years of dangerous fieldwork. Their names were whispered in intelligence circles from Berlin to Prague, their successes classified but legendary among their peers. Mid-level agents fought for their attention, hoping to be selected for high-stakes assignments that could make careers. Then there were the support staff analysts, technical specialists, and administrative personnel who kept the machine running, but rarely saw field action. They worked in climate-controlled offices, their contributions vital but invisible, their faces unknown outside these walls. It was a system that worked, built on proven expertise and calculated risk management. Morning routine never varied. Chen would review the previous week's operations, assess current threats, and assign new missions based on a complex matrix of skill sets, security clearances, and operational necessity. Each assignment was a careful calculation, balancing the mission's requirements against the operative's proven capabilities. There was no room for experimentation, no tolerance for unproven personnel in situations where lives and international stability hung in the balance. Coffee cups steamed on the conference table as operatives reviewed their briefing materials. The conversations were muted but intense discussions of extraction routes, cover identities, and surveillance countermeasures. These men and women had trained for years to reach this level, had proven themselves in dozens of operations, had earned their place through competence and reliability. Outside the windows, Vienna went about its ordinary Tuesday business. Tourists photographed Baroque architecture, diplomats attended routine meetings, and business executives hurried between appointments. They had no idea that 30 floors above, decisions were being made that could affect their lives in ways they'd never know. The center existed in its own reality, separate from the civilian world below, operating by rules that civilians couldn't comprehend. As 9 a.m. approached, The last stragglers filed into the briefing room. Smartphones were surrendered to security. Containers, classified folders were distributed with military precision, and the week's most sensitive operations prepared to be unveiled. It was a routine that had been followed for years, a system built on expertise, hierarchy, and proven results. But on this particular Tuesday morning, that routine was about to be shattered by someone no one expected, someone who wasn't supposed to be capable of anything more dangerous than filing reports and maintaining equipment records. Someone whose very presence in this room was considered a courtesy rather than a necessity. Bora Quin sat in the back corner of the briefing room, as far from the action as possible, without actually being in the hallway. At 22, she was the youngest person in the building by at least 6 years, a reality that showed in everything. From her nervous habit of tucking dark hair behind her ears, to the way she seemed to fold in on herself when senior operatives walked past. Born in Ljubljana, Slovenia, Bora had grown up in the shadow of the Julian Alps, where her childhood had been spent scrambling over limestone cliffs and navigating the labyrinthine cave systems that honeycombed the region. Her grandmother, Marija, had been a mountain guide who taught her that size and strength mattered less than understanding terrain, reading weather patterns, and moving efficiently through spaces others considered impassable. But those skills seemed irrelevant in the sterile corridors of the intelligence center. Here, Bora's official title was Technical Equipment Coordinator, a role that involved maintaining surveillance gear, updating inventory databases, and ensuring that field operatives had properly functioning communication devices. It was important work, but it was invisible work, the kind that kept the organization running, but never earned recognition or respect. Her colleagues saw a petite woman who barely reached 5 feet 4 inches, with delicate features that made her look more like a university student than an intelligence professional. Her Eastern European accent, though faint after 2 years in Vienna, marked her as an outsider in an organization dominated by operatives from Western Europe's major powers. When she spoke during briefings, which was rare, her suggestions were met with polite smiles and immediate dismissal. The truth was that Bora's technical role had given her unprecedented access to the center's operational infrastructure. While maintaining communication equipment, she had studied the schematics of every building in their operational territory. While updating surveillance gear, she had memorized the blind spots in security systems across 12 European capitals. While cataloging field equipment, she had learned the capabilities and limitations of every tool in their arsenal. More importantly, she had been teaching herself skills that no one knew about. The center's gym was empty during lunch hours when most operatives were either eating or attending meetings. Bora spent those times developing abilities that her mountain guide grandmother would have recognized: balance, precision, and the kind of body awareness that allowed someone to move through complex environments without disturbing so much as a dust mote. She had studied architectural plans of major buildings during her off hours, not because it was required, but because she found herself fascinated by the challenge of imagining how to navigate spaces designed to keep people out. Her apartment was filled with books on historical infiltration techniques, lock-picking manuals disguised as technical publications, and climbing guides for every major European city. The other operatives, when they noticed her at all, found her interests amusing. Marcus Anderson had once caught her studying the structural plans for a Prague government building during a break, planning a career change. Quinn, he'd asked with a patronizing smile, "Maybe you can be our architectural consultant." The comment had earned chuckles from nearby operatives who saw her as an eager but misguided support staffer trying to play above her level. What they didn't understand was that Bora's approach to problems was fundamentally different from theirs. Where they saw obstacles, she saw puzzles. Where they calculated risks, she identified opportunities. Where they relied on proven techniques, she imagined entirely new approaches. Her mind worked like water, finding the path of least resistance through seemingly impossible challenges. During equipment maintenance, she had discovered that several surveillance systems had exploitable gaps weaknesses that could be used for infiltration rather than just observation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. While updating communication protocols, she had realized that certain frequency patterns could be manipulated to create temporary blind spots in security networks. While organizing field gear, she had identified combinations of equipment that could be used for purposes their designers never intended. But these insights remained locked in her head, dismissed as the amateur theorizing of someone who had never faced real-world operational challenges. In an organization built on proven expertise and demonstrated capability, Bora's untested ideas were seen as interesting at best, dangerously naive at worst. As Director Chen began the morning briefing, Bora opened her standard issue notebook and prepared to record equipment requests and maintenance schedules. Around her, 30 of Europe's most accomplished operatives focused on missions that would test their skills against international criminals, foreign intelligence services, and terrorist networks. None of them imagined that before the day was over, the quiet young woman in the back corner would accomplish something they would have considered impossible. The mission assignments began with the cases everyone wanted. Director Chen's voice carried across the briefing room as she outlined Operation Blackwater, a high-stakes infiltration of a weapons trafficking network operating out of Budapest. The target was Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence officer who had gone rogue and was selling classified NATO technologies to the highest bidder. "Anderson, you'll lead the team," Chen announced, sliding a thick folder across the table. To Marcus, "Laurent, you're second in command. Rodriguez handles surveillance, and Peterson manages extraction protocols." The chosen operatives exchanged satisfied glances. Blackwater was the kind of assignment that could define a career dangerous enough to be prestigious, important enough to catch the attention of department heads in Brussels. Bora watched from her corner as the elite operatives claimed their prizes. Operation Nightshade went to a team led by James Crawford, targeting a cyber-terrorism cell in Berlin. Operation Goldfinch, a delicate diplomatic infiltration in Prague, was assigned to Sophia Lawrence's specialized unit. Each mission was handed out like a precious gift, reserved for those who had already proven themselves worthy of such trust. The pattern was always the same. The most dangerous and important operations went to operatives with established track records, men and women who had earned their reputation through years of successful fieldwork. Mid-level agents received supporting roles or less critical assignments. And at the bottom of the hierarchy, support staff like Bora were given the invisible tasks that kept everything running but never mattered when promotions and recognition were distributed. "Quin," Director Chen's voice cut through Bora's observations, "you'll be handling equipment verification for all teams. I need detailed reports on communication gear, surveillance equipment, and emergency protocols. Standard format, submitted by 1800 hours." It was the same assignment Bora received every week, making sure that other people had the tools they needed to accomplish missions. She would never be trusted to attempt. As the briefing continued, Bora noticed how seamlessly the assignments flowed to the same group of operatives. When Chen announced a secondary mission requiring someone with proven urban navigation skills, Crawford volunteered immediately and was accepted without question. When a backup infiltration specialist was needed for the Budapest operation, Laurent recommended one of her protégés, who was approved based solely on that endorsement. The system was designed to perpetuate itself. Those who had opportunities succeeded, and their success earned them more opportunities. Meanwhile, people like Bora remained locked in support roles, their potential unmeasured because they were never given the chance to demonstrate it. It was efficient, Chen often argued, to rely on proven capabilities rather than gamble on unproven personnel. but efficiency came at a cost. The same operatives were assigned similar missions repeatedly, creating expertise in narrow areas while leaving gaps in the organization's overall capabilities. When unusual challenges arose, situations that required different approaches or unconventional solutions, the standard roster of elite operatives sometimes struggled to adapt. Bora had noticed this pattern developing over the past year. The Budapest trafficking network, for example, had evaded capture 3 times using tactics that exploited the predictable approaches of traditional surveillance teams. The Berlin cyber terrorists had successfully anticipated and countered conventional infiltration methods on multiple occasions. Yet rather than considering alternative approaches, the organization's response was always to assign more experienced operatives using the same proven techniques. After the briefing, Bora lingered in the conference room, reviewing the mission files that had been left for her equipment assessments. She studied the operational plans with the same intensity that other operatives brought to their own assignments, but her insights would never be requested or valued. Her role was to ensure that communication devices functioned properly, not to question whether the communication strategies themselves were optimal. As she gathered the classified folders, Bora overheard fragments of conversation that reinforced her invisible status. "Good thing we have Quinn handling the technical details," Crawford was saying to Anderson. "Saves us from worrying about the boring stuff." The comment wasn't malicious. Crawford genuinely appreciated competent support staff, but it reflected the unconscious assumption that some people were suited for important work while others were designed to enable it. Walking back to her equipment storage area, Bora passed bulletin boards covered with photos of successful operations, commendation letters, and award ceremonies. Every image showed the same group of people, the elite operatives whose faces had become synonymous with the organization's success. Support staff were occasionally mentioned in footnotes or group acknowledgments, but they were never the heroes of these stories. The message was clear. There were people who accomplished important things, and there were people who helped them accomplish important things. Bora had been categorized in the second group, and nothing in the organization's structure suggested that categorization would ever change. Her job was to count equipment and file reports, not to dream of infiltrating enemy strongholds or disrupting international criminal networks. But as she settled into her workspace and began reviewing the technical requirements for that day's missions, Bora couldn't shake the feeling that the organization's careful efficiency was also its greatest weakness. By relying so heavily on proven methods and established personnel, they were blind to possibilities that existed outside their established framework. While the elite operatives prepared for their assigned missions in the building's specialized training facilities, Bora Quin was conducting her own preparation in spaces no one monitored. The technical equipment storage area in the basement had become her unofficial laboratory, where she spent hours after her official duties ended, developing skills that no training manual had ever described. Her workstation appeared conventional rows of communication devices, surveillance equipment catalogs, and maintenance logs that documented every piece of gear in the organization's inventory. But hidden beneath the bureaucratic facade was a collection of materials that revealed the true scope of her preparation. Detailed architectural blueprints of major European government buildings, acquired through legitimate research requests that no one questioned. Technical manuals for security systems that she'd convinced vendors to provide under the guise of compatibility testing. Urban climbing guides disguised as geological surveys. Every evening, after the last operative had left for their apartments or safe houses, Bora would spread these materials across her desk and immerse herself in study sessions that would have impressed even the organization's most dedicated analysts. She had memorized the structural details of every major building in 12 European capitals, identifying potential infiltration routes that architects had never intended and security consultants had never considered. Her approach was methodical and exhaustive. For each target building, she would begin with official blueprints, then layer on information from construction photographs, utility maps, and maintenance records. She studied how buildings changed over time, which walls had been reinforced, which ventilation systems had been upgraded, which security measures had been added or modified. The result was a three-dimensional understanding of urban infrastructure that exceeded what most operatives acquired about buildings they were specifically assigned to penetrate. But the theoretical knowledge was only part of her preparation. The building's gym was equipped for the physical conditioning that traditional operatives required: weights, cardio equipment, and combat training areas. During lunch hours and after-hours periods when these facilities were empty, Bora had developed her own training regimen focused on skills that the official curriculum ignored. Balance and precision were her specialties. She would spend hours walking narrow beams, moving across unstable surfaces, and practicing movements that required absolute body control. Her grandmother's mountain guide training had taught her that strength mattered less than efficiency, that someone who understood leverage and momentum could accomplish things that brute force couldn't achieve. The climbing wall in the gym's corner became her testing ground for techniques that combined traditional mountaineering with urban infiltration concepts. She practiced moving vertically with minimal equipment, using improvised handholds and exploring how architectural features could be exploited for access. Her progress was steady and undocumented. She never logged her training sessions or shared her achievements with colleagues who might have questioned why a technical coordinator needed such specialized physical skills. More sophisticated preparation took place in the organization's computer labs during off-peak hours. Bora had legitimate access to these systems for her equipment coordination duties, but she used that access to explore databases and simulation programs that were far beyond her official responsibilities. She studied security camera coverage patterns, learning to identify blind spots and timing intervals that could be exploited. She analyzed radio communication protocols, discovering how emergency frequencies could be manipulated to create temporary gaps in surveillance networks. The most ambitious aspect of her preparation involved acquiring specialized equipment that wasn't part of the organization's standard inventory. Using her position as equipment coordinator, she had established relationships with suppliers who provided gear for legitimate maintenance and testing purposes. But hidden within these professional relationships were opportunities to acquire items that served different purposes: climbing hardware that could be adapted for building infiltration, communication devices that could be modified for unauthorized uses, and surveillance countermeasures that were supposedly for testing, but could be employed operationally. Her apartment had become a workshop where she modified and tested equipment combinations that didn't exist in any official manual. She had developed lightweight kits that could be concealed in maintenance toolboxes, created communication devices that could operate outside official frequencies, and assembled infiltration gear that weighed less than a typical operative standard equipment load. Nobody questioned her dedication to equipment maintenance. Her supervisors praised her thorough approach to technical documentation and her ability to anticipate operational needs before they were articulated. What they didn't realize was that her maintenance research was actually operational planning for missions that hadn't been assigned to her, missions that she was preparing to undertake whether or not anyone ever asked her to. The most intensive preparation sessions occurred during weekends and holidays, when the building was nearly empty except for essential security personnel. Bora would use these periods to test her theories about building navigation, practicing routes through the intelligence center itself that demonstrated how someone could move undetected through supposedly secure facilities. She had mapped every blind spot in the building's security coverage, identified every maintenance access that could serve as an infiltration route, and timed every patrol pattern that could be exploited for unauthorized movement. Her own workplace had become her training ground, and her success in moving undetected through the building gave her confidence that the Techniques could be applied to external targets, but perhaps the most significant aspect of her preparation was psychological. While other operatives focused on managing fear and stress during dangerous situations, Bora had trained herself to think differently about challenges that others considered impossible. Where they saw barriers, she had learned to see puzzles. Where they calculated risks, she identified opportunities for creative solutions. This mental framework was the product of thousands of hours spent studying problems that had no official solutions, developing approaches that didn't exist in training manuals, and imagining possibilities that conventional thinking couldn't conceive. It was preparation for opportunities that might never come, training for missions that might never be assigned. The dismissive attitudes toward Bora had crystallized over months of small incidents that reinforced the organization's unconscious hierarchy. It started during her second week at the Intelligence Center, when she had suggested an alternative surveillance approach during a routine briefing. Marcus Anderson had listened politely, then explained with a patronizing smile why people with actual field experience understood the complexities that technical staff might overlook. The condescension wasn't malicious, it was worse than that. It was institutional, built into the assumption that certain people were qualified to have operational opinions while others were not. Bora's suggestions, no matter how well researched or innovative, were automatically categorized as amateur, theorizing by someone who had never faced real-world pressures. "She's eager, I'll give her that," Sophia Laurent had commented to Crawford after Bora presented a detailed analysis of security vulnerabilities in the Prague embassy. But there's a difference between studying blueprints and actually navigating hostile territory. Real operations require experience that you can't get from books. The conversation, overheard through a partially open door, had stung because Laurent's tone wasn't cruel. It was the kind of gentle dismissal reserved for well-meaning but misguided enthusiasm. The physical assumptions were even more persistent. During a mandatory fitness evaluation, Bora had outperformed several male operatives in endurance and precision tests, but the only comment from the evaluating officer was that her results were impressive for someone her size. When she mentioned her rock climbing background during a casual conversation, Crawford had laughed and said, "That's adorable. Maybe you can help us with team-building exercises sometime." The most frustrating dismissals came when her technical expertise intersected with operational planning. Bora had spent weeks analyzing communication patterns used by the Budapest trafficking network, identifying weaknesses in their security protocols that could be exploited for intelligence gathering. When she presented her findings to Director Chen, the response was immediate. "This is excellent technical analysis. Quin, I'll make sure the operational team sees this when they're developing their infiltration strategy." The report was filed and forgotten. When Operation Blackwater encountered communication security challenges that Bora's analysis had predicted and solved, the operational team spent 3 days developing workarounds that were less effective than the solutions she had already provided. But nobody remembered the technical coordinator's report, because technical coordinators weren't expected to contribute to operational solutions. The casual conversations were the worst part. Bora would be updating equipment inventories while operatives discussed their assignments nearby, never considering that she might have insights worth hearing. Their conversations revealed assumptions that went deeper than professional hierarchy, assumptions about what kinds of people were suited for dangerous work and what kinds were designed to support those who faced real challenges. Can you imagine Quin trying to handle an extraction under fire? Rodriguez had asked during one such conversation. "She's competent with the technical stuff, but field operations require a different kind of person. Someone who can make life or death decisions under pressure." The comment had been accompanied by glances in her direction that weren't unkind, just dismissive in the way that people dismiss possibilities they've never seriously considered. Gender dynamics were subtle but persistent. Female operatives like Laurent had earned respect through proven performance, but they had also adapted to an organizational culture that valued traditionally masculine approaches to problem-solving. Bora's smaller stature and quieter demeanor marked her as someone who didn't fit the established template for operational effectiveness, regardless of her actual capabilities. During training exercises, when support staff were occasionally included. For realistic scenarios, Bora was always assigned to roles that reinforced her support status, monitoring communications, managing equipment, or providing logistical coordination. When she asked about participating in more active roles, the response was always the same. These exercises were designed to test operatives under conditions they would actually face, and putting untrained personnel in operational roles would compromise the training value for everyone else. But the most damaging dismissal was the one she overheard between Director Chen and Deputy Director Walsh during a budget meeting. "Quinn is exceptionally competent in her assigned role," Chen had said, "but we need to be careful about scope creep. Technical staff who start thinking they're operatives can become security risks. It's better to keep people focused on what they do well rather than encouraging unrealistic ambitions." The conversation revealed the fundamental barrier Bora faced. Her competence in technical duties was being used as evidence that she belonged in technical roles, not as a foundation for expanding into operational work. Excellence in her assigned responsibilities had become a prison that prevented her from demonstrating capabilities in other areas. The dismissive attitudes weren't limited to operational matters. When Bora mentioned her weekend climbing trips, colleagues assumed she was talking about recreational hiking. When she discussed architectural photography as a hobby, they imagined tourist snapshots rather than detailed surveillance documentation. When she spoke knowledgeably about European cities, they attributed it to vacation travel rather than systematic tactical study. These assumptions created a feedback loop that reinforced her marginalization, because people expected her to be interested in technical details and support functions. That's all they noticed about her contributions. Because they didn't expect her to have operational insights, they didn't listen when she offered them. Because they couldn't imagine her handling dangerous assignments, they never created opportunities for her to prove otherwise. The result was an organizational blindness that extended beyond Bora personally. By categorizing people so rigidly, the intelligence center was limiting its own capabilities, missing opportunities to leverage talents that didn't fit traditional templates. But challenging those assumptions would require someone to prove that the conventional wisdom was wrong, and proving conventional wisdom wrong would require opportunities that the conventional wisdom prevented anyone from receiving. As another morning briefing concluded with Bora receiving another equipment coordination assignment, she realized that her colleagues' dismissive attitudes had become her greatest tactical advantage, because they couldn't imagine her attempting anything beyond her assigned role. They would never see her coming. The emergency alert pierced through the intelligence center's routine at 10:23 a.m., just as Bora was cataloging surveillance equipment in the basement storage area. The distinctive triple-tone pattern that indicated a code-red situation sent personnel scrambling throughout the building. Through the facility's intercom system, Director Chen's voice carried an urgency that Bora had never heard before. "All senior operatives to command center immediately. This is not a drill." Bora abandoned her inventory checklist and climbed the stairs to the main operational floor, where the atmosphere had transformed from routine efficiency to controlled chaos. Computer screens displayed urgent communications from intelligence networks across Europe, and the wall-mounted situation board was being updated with real-time information that made her blood run cold. The crisis had erupted in Prague, where Operation Goldfinch, the diplomatic infiltration mission assigned to Sofia, Laurent's team, had gone catastrophically wrong. The team had been compromised while attempting to extract classified documents from the Czech Ministry of Defense, And what should have been a covert intelligence gathering operation had escalated international incident that threatened to expose the entire European intelligence coordination network. Lawrence's team is trapped inside the ministry building. Director Chen was explaining to the assembled operatives. Czech security forces have surrounded the perimeter, but they don't yet know they're dealing with foreign intelligence operatives. We have approximately 2 hours before the Czechs identify them, and this becomes a diplomatic catastrophe that could shut down our entire operation. The tactical display showed the ministry building in devastating detail, a neo-Baroque structure from the early 20th century that had been retrofitted with modern security systems that made it nearly impenetrable. Lawrence's 3-person team was trapped on the 7th floor. Their original extraction route compromised by an unexpected security upgrade that their advanced intelligence had missed. Marcus Anderson stepped forward, his expression grim as he studied the building schematics. Standard extraction protocols won't work. The building's in the middle of Prague's government district, surrounded by civilian buildings and monitored by multiple security agencies. Any conventional approach will be detected before we can reach the team. Crawford nodded in agreement, pointing to the tactical display. The Czech security forces have established a perimeter that covers all standard approach routes. Even if we could reach the building, the new security systems create overlapping coverage that eliminates traditional infiltration paths. We're looking at a fortress that was specifically designed to prevent exactly what we need to accomplish. The discussion continued for 20 minutes, with each proposed solution encountering insurmountable obstacles. Helicopter extraction was impossible due to air traffic monitoring, and the building's location in helicopter extraction was impossible due to air traffic monitoring. Prague's restricted airspace. Ground-based assault would create the international incident they were trying to avoid. Traditional infiltration techniques were useless against security systems that had been upgraded specifically to counter known intelligence tactics. Bora listened from her position near the equipment coordination station, her mind automatically processing the tactical challenges. While the senior operatives struggled with approaches that wouldn't work, she had studied the Prague ministry building extensively during her own preparation, had identified vulnerabilities that the official intelligence assessments had missed, and had developed infiltration strategies that exploited architectural features the security consultants had never considered. But as the discussion continued, she realized that the conventional solutions being proposed were doomed to fail, not because they were poorly executed, but because they were fundamentally mismatched to the specific challenges of this target. The ministry building's security had been designed by people who understood traditional intelligence tactics, which meant that traditional tactics would be anticipated and countered. "Time is running out," Chen announced, checking the secure communication device that maintained contact with Lawrence's trapped team. "Czech security is conducting systematic sweeps of the building. They'll reach the 7th floor within 90 minutes, and once they identify our operatives, we'll have an international crisis that could destroy 20 years of intelligence cooperation." The pressure in the command center was palpable. These were operatives who had successfully completed dozens of dangerous missions, but they were facing a scenario that exceeded their established capabilities. The building was too well defended. For conventional approaches, the time frame was too compressed for elaborate planning, and the diplomatic stakes were too high for anything but perfect execution. Rodriguez suggested a diversionary action that might draw Czech security away from the building, but Chen rejected it as too likely to escalate the situation. Peterson proposed a technical solution involving electronic surveillance jamming, but the ministry's systems were too sophisticated to be disrupted without triggering additional security responses. As each proposal was analyzed and discarded, Bora found herself visualizing alternative approaches that none of the senior operatives had considered. The ministry building had architectural features that could be exploited by someone with the right combination of skills and equipment. The security systems had blind spots that could be navigated by someone who understood how to move through urban environments without triggering detection protocols. But most importantly, the entire crisis was unfolding during broad daylight on a busy Tuesday morning, which created opportunities that nighttime infiltration missions never offered. The surrounding area was full of civilian activity that could provide camouflage for someone who knew how to blend into urban backgrounds. The building's security was focused on detecting obvious threats, not on identifying someone who could approach and enter using methods that security consultants had never imagined. Bora glanced at the mission clock displaying the time remaining before check security reached the 7th floor. 83 minutes and counting. The senior operatives were still debating variations of approaches that wouldn't work, while Laurent's team remained trapped in a building that every conventional assessment deemed impossible to penetrate. For the first time in her career at the Intelligence Center, Bora realized that she might be the only person in the room who could solve the problem they were facing. The question was whether she would have the courage to step forward and volunteer for a mission that everyone would consider suicide, and whether anyone would listen to her if she tried. The command center had fallen into a tense silence as the mission clock displayed 78 minutes remaining. Director Chen stood at the tactical display, her jaw tight with frustration as she studied the Prague Ministry building one more time. Every conventional approach had been analyzed and rejected. Every standard protocol had proven inadequate for the unique challenges of this extraction. Bora felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she stepped away from the equipment. Coordination Station. The movement caught the attention of several operatives, who looked surprised to see the technical coordinator approaching the central planning area, where only senior personnel typically participated in crisis discussions. Director Chen, Bora said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. I believe I can reach Laurent's team and extract them from the building. The command center went completely silent. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward her with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Marcus Anderson actually laughed a short, incredulous sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Quin, Director Chen said carefully, this is not the time for theoretical discussions. We need practical solutions from operatives with proven field experience. I have a practical solution, Bora replied, moving to the tactical display and pointing to specific architectural features of the ministry building. The security assessment missed several infiltration routes that become viable when you understand the building's original construction. There's a maintenance access system that connects to the 7th floor through passages that weren't included in the modern security retrofit. Crawford stepped forward, his expression a mixture of concern and patronizing patience. Bora, we appreciate your technical knowledge, but infiltrating a government building under hostile surveillance requires skills that can't be learned from studying blueprints. Even our most experienced operatives wouldn't attempt this extraction under current conditions. Which is exactly why it might work, Bora said, her confidence growing as she articulated the approach she'd been developing in her mind. Check. Security is monitoring for conventional infiltration techniques. They're watching for the approaches that experienced operatives would use. But they're not prepared for someone who can access the building through routes that don't exist in any official security assessment. She moved to the computer terminal and pulled up detailed architectural data that she'd studied during her months of preparation. The ministry building was constructed in 1923 with a complex maintenance infrastructure that was partially sealed during the 1970s renovation. But the sealed passages still exist, and they connect to the modern ventilation system through access points that are invisible to current security monitoring. Rodriguez shook his head, his voice carrying the kind of gentle firmness used to redirect someone who had wandered into dangerous territory. Even if these passages exist, navigating them would require specialized training that takes years to develop. Urban infiltration isn't something you can improvise, especially under hostile conditions. I'm not improvising, Bora said quietly. I've been preparing for exactly this type of scenario for over a year. I know every structural detail of major government buildings in 12 European capitals, including this one. I've developed navigation techniques specifically designed for moving through architectural spaces that weren't intended for human passage. And I've acquired the equipment necessary to execute infiltration missions that conventional tactics can't accomplish. The command center erupted in overlapping conversations as operatives tried to process what they were hearing. The quiet technical coordinator who filed equipment reports was claiming capabilities that none of them had suspected, proposing to attempt a mission that their most experienced personnel had deemed impossible. Absolutely not, Anderson said firmly. Even if you had the theoretical knowledge, which is questionable, this extraction requires someone who can make life or death decisions under extreme pressure. Someone who's been tested in hostile environments and proven capable of handling unexpected complications. I can handle the pressure, Bora replied, her voice carrying a quiet conviction that surprised everyone in the room. And I can reach Laurent's team through infiltration routes that no conventional operative would attempt, because no conventional operative has studied this building the way I have. Director Chen studied Bora with new attention, as if seeing her for the first time. Quin, what exactly are you proposing? Bora moved back to the tactical display, her fingers tracing routes across the building schematic with the confidence of someone who had memorized every detail. I can access the building through the maintenance infrastructure, navigate to the 7th floor using passages that bypass all security monitoring, and extract the team through routes that check security has never considered protecting. How? Chen asked, her tone shifting from dismissive to genuinely curious. The building's original construction included service corridors that connect the basement mechanical areas to every floor. These corridors were partially sealed, but not eliminated. During the security upgrades, I can enter through a utility access point that's monitored only by basic sensors, navigate through the hidden infrastructure, and reach the 7th floor without triggering any of the systems that detect conventional infiltration attempts. Peterson, who had been silent throughout the discussion, stepped forward with a technical question. Even if these passages exist, how would you extract 3 people through routes that were designed for maintenance access? The physical constraints alone would make group movement impossible. Bora had anticipated this challenge. I'll extract the team individually, using a relay system that moves one person at a time through the optimal route while the others remain hidden. The process will take longer than conventional extraction, but it will be undetectable by current monitoring systems. The mission clock showed 71 minutes remaining. Czech security was continuing their systematic sweep of the building, and Laurent's team was running out of places to hide. While the senior operatives debated theoretical possibilities, time was slipping away for any solution to work. This is insane, Crawford said, voicing what most of the room was thinking. We're talking about sending an untested technical coordinator into one of the most dangerous infiltration scenarios any of us has ever encountered. If she fails, we lose 4 people instead of 3, and we still have an international crisis. If we do nothing, Bora replied, we definitely lose 3 people and definitely have an international crisis. At least my approach offers a possibility of success. Director Chen looked at the mission clock, then at the tactical display showing Laurent's deteriorating situation, then back at Bora. The decision she was contemplating would either save 3 lives and prevent an international incident, or would add a 4th casualty to a crisis that was already spiraling out of control. Director Chen's request for details triggered an immediate and forceful response from every senior operative in the command center. The idea of allowing an untested technical coordinator to attempt what they considered a suicide mission violated every protocol and principle that had kept the organization effective for decades. Director, with all due respect, this is exactly the kind of decision that gets people killed, Marcus Anderson said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years of successful operations. Fieldwork requires experience that can't be substituted. With theoretical knowledge, no matter how comprehensive, Quin may understand building schematics, but that doesn't qualify her to operate in hostile territory under life-or-death pressure. Crawford nodded emphatically, moving to the tactical display to reinforce Anderson's argument. Look at what we're asking someone to do here. Penetrate a secured government building, navigate through unmapped passages, locate and extract 3 trained operatives, and escape without detection, all while Czech security forces are conducting active sweeps. This isn't a training exercise where mistakes can be corrected. One wrong turn, one triggered sensor, one moment of hesitation, and everyone dies. The resistance wasn't just about Bora's lack of field experience. It was about the institutional wisdom that had been built through decades of operations where careful risk assessment and proven capabilities had meant the difference between success and catastrophe. The intelligence community operated on the principle that missions should be assigned to personnel whose qualifications matched the requirements, not to volunteers whose enthusiasm exceeded their credentials. Deputy Director Walsh, who had been monitoring the crisis from Brussels via secure communication, joined the discussion through the command center's main screen. Chen, I understand that we're facing desperate circumstances, but authorizing an unqualified operative to attempt this extraction would be a dereliction of our duty to the personnel already in danger. We can't compound one crisis by creating another. Sir, Bora interjected, I'm not unqualified. I'm differently qualified. My approach to this infiltration is based on capabilities that conventional training doesn't develop, using techniques that standard protocols don't recognize. The fact that my qualifications are non-traditional doesn't mean they're inadequate for this specific challenge. Welsh's expression on the video screen was skeptical but not dismissive. Explain what makes you think you can succeed where our most experienced operatives believe success is impossible. Bora took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either convince them to trust her or permanently cement their perception of her as delusionally overconfident. Traditional infiltration relies on overpowering or circumventing security systems. My approach is based on avoiding those systems entirely by moving through spaces that security planners never considered accessible. It's the difference between breaking through a locked door and finding a door that was never locked because no one imagined anyone would try to use it. Rodriguez stepped forward with a practical concern that cut to the heart of the resistance she was facing. Even if your infiltration theory is sound, extraction operations require teamwork and communication protocols that take months to develop. How do you coordinate with Lawrence's team when you've never worked with them operationally? How do you manage 3 people who don't know your methods and may not trust your leadership in a crisis situation? I'll adapt to their protocols rather than imposing my own, Bora replied. Laurent and her team are experienced operatives who understand extraction procedures. My role is to provide them with an escape route they can use, not to direct their every action. But the resistance went deeper than tactical concerns. Peterson raised the issue that everyone was thinking, but few were willing to articulate directly. Quin, you're asking us to bet the lives of 3 seasoned operatives on the untested theories of someone who's never faced hostile fire. That's not just risky, it's potentially criminal negligence. If this goes wrong, we're responsible for sending someone to die because we were too desperate to think clearly. The words stung because they revealed the institutional assumption that Bora was struggling against. In the organization's hierarchy, her technical competence was respected, but her operational judgment was considered inherently unreliable. She was seen as someone who could analyze problems, but not someone who could solve them under pressure. Director Chen found herself caught between desperation and responsibility. The mission clock showed 64 minutes remaining before check security. Reached the 7th floor, and no conventional solution had emerged that offered any realistic hope of success. But authorizing an untested operative to attempt an extraction that experienced personnel considered impossible felt like abandoning her duty to make rational decisions based on proven capabilities. "Quin," Chen said carefully, "walk me through your infiltration plan step by step. I want to understand exactly what you're proposing and how you've prepared for the specific challenges this mission presents." The request created a moment of tension as everyone in the command center focused on Bora's response. She knew that this was her only opportunity to demonstrate that her preparation had been thorough enough to justify the trust they were being asked to place in her. "I'll enter the building through a utility access point in the basement that connects to the original maintenance corridors," she began, moving to the computer terminal to display the architectural data she'd studied. These corridors were designed for service personnel in the 1920s, before modern security systems existed. They provide access to every floor through routes that bypass all current monitoring systems. She pulled up detailed schematics showing the hidden infrastructure that existed within the building's walls. The path to the 7th floor requires navigating through 3 different corridor systems and 2 vertical shafts that were sealed during renovations but never eliminated. I've identified handholds and support points that will allow me to climb these shafts safely, and I've calculated the timing necessary to avoid maintenance schedules that could result in detection. Anderson studied the schematics with professional skepticism. "These passages look barely wide enough for one person. And you're talking about extracting 3 people through routes that require technical climbing skills. How do you get Laurent's team through obstacles they've never encountered and haven't trained for?" "I'll guide them through each obstacle individually," Bora explained. "The extraction will take longer than conventional methods, but it will be completely invisible to check security. By the time they realize the team is missing, we'll already be clear of the building." The resistance in the room was still palpable, but it was beginning to shift from absolute rejection to serious consideration of an impossible choice. The conventional wisdom said that sending Bora on this mission was reckless and dangerous. But the conventional wisdom also had no solution to offer, and time was running out for any solution to matter. "Director," Walsh said from the video screen, "this is your decision to make. But I want it on record that authorizing this operation violates every protocol we have for matching personnel capabilities to mission requirements." Chen looked at the mission clock, then at the tactical display showing Lawrence deteriorating situation, then at Bora's confident expression. In 63 minutes, 3 experienced operatives would be captured or killed, and the entire European intelligence cooperation network would face a crisis that could take decades to repair. Question was whether the potential for saving those lives justified the risk of losing a 4th. The debate had been raging for 8 minutes when communications specialist Davis raised the concern that shifted the entire discussion in a darker direction. "Director, before we make any decision about this extraction, I think we need to address some unusual patterns in Specialist Quin's behavior that have been noticed over the past several months." The command center's attention swiveled toward Davis, who looked uncomfortable about becoming the center of attention during a crisis, but seemed convinced that his concerns were too important to ignore. Bora felt a cold dread settling in her stomach as she realized that her months of preparation were about to be reframed as evidence of something sinister. "What kind of patterns?" Director Chen asked, her voice taking on the careful neutrality she used when investigating potential security breaches. Davis consulted his tablet, displaying data that he'd apparently been compiling for some time. "Quin has been accessing building schematics for government facilities across 12 European capitals, far beyond anything required for her equipment coordination duties. She's been studying classified architectural data, security protocols, and infiltration countermeasures. for buildings that have no connection to any current operations she's supposed to support. Rodriguez nodded, adding his own observations to the growing cloud of suspicion. I've noticed her in the gym during off hours, practicing what looked like specialized climbing techniques and infiltration training. When I asked about it, she claimed it was recreational fitness, but the skill level she was developing seemed far beyond hobbyist interest. The accusations created a cascade of additional observations that painted Bora's dedication in an increasingly suspicious light. Peterson mentioned her unusual equipment requests, items that could be used for building infiltration disguised as legitimate maintenance supplies. Williams noted her extensive knowledge of security camera coverage patterns throughout the facility. Information that seemed unnecessary for someone whose job involved tracking communication devices. More concerning, Davis continued, is her pattern of studying operational files that were supposedly left on her desk for equipment assessment, but which she reviewed far more thoroughly than necessary for her assigned duties. She's been analyzing mission plans, memorizing target locations, and developing what appears to be unauthorized operational knowledge about classified activities. Crawford stepped forward with the observation that crystallized everyone's growing unease. What we're looking at here is someone who has been systematically preparing for operations she's not authorized to conduct, using access privileges she's supposed to use for technical support to gather intelligence about classified missions and secure facilities. That's not dedication to professional development. That's potential preparation for espionage. The transformation in the room's atmosphere was palpable. Bora watched in horror as months of careful preparation were being reinterpreted through a lens of suspicion that turned every positive quality into a potential threat. Her thoroughness became evidence of unauthorized intelligence gathering. Her physical training became preparation for infiltration activities. Her operational knowledge became proof of security violations. Furthermore, Anderson added, she's been acquiring specialized equipment through her coordinator position gear that has no legitimate use for technical support but would be perfect for unauthorized building infiltration. She's essentially been using organizational resources to build her own operational capability without oversight or authorization. Deputy Director Walsh's voice came through the secure communication link with a gravity that made the command center fall silent. Chen, what we're describing here is a textbook case of an insider threat. Someone who uses legitimate access to gather capabilities and intelligence for unauthorized purposes. The fact that she's volunteering for this extraction mission could be an attempt to exploit the crisis for her own objectives. Bora felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as her colleagues' perceptions of her underwent a complete transformation. Where they had once seen harmless enthusiasm, they now saw potential deception. Where they had once dismissed her capabilities as amateur hobby, they now viewed them as evidence of covert preparation. The very qualities that qualified her for the extraction mission were being used as proof that she couldn't be trusted to attempt it. "Director," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest, "everything I've done has been in preparation for exactly this kind of situation. I studied those buildings because I wanted to be ready if the organization ever needed someone with specialized infiltration capabilities. I developed those skills because I believed they might someday save lives. I acquired that equipment because I thought it might be necessary for operations that conventional approaches couldn't handle." "That's exactly what someone with ulterior motives would say," Peterson replied. "The problem is that your preparation went far beyond what any legitimate support role would require. You've been developing operational capabilities in secret, using organizational resources for unauthorized purposes, and accessing classified information outside your area of responsibility. That pattern suggests objectives that you haven't shared with your supervisors." The suspicion was spreading like a virus through the command center, infecting every interaction Bora had ever had with her colleagues. Crawford mentioned the times she'd asked detailed questions about operational procedures, now interpreting her curiosity as intelligence gathering rather than professional interest. Rodriguez recalled conversations where she demonstrated knowledge about field operations that seemed inappropriate for someone in her position. Consider the timing, Davis added, building the case that was forming against her. Lawrence's team gets trapped in Prague, conventional extraction methods fail, and suddenly our technical coordinator reveals that she's been secretly preparing for exactly this type of infiltration mission. That's either an incredible coincidence or evidence that she's been planning to exploit exactly this kind of crisis. Director Chen found herself facing a nightmare scenario that intelligence directors had been trained to recognize and prevent. An insider threat was someone who used legitimate access to develop unauthorized capabilities, often revealing themselves only when they attempted to exploit a crisis situation for their own purposes. The pattern Davis and the others were describing fit that template perfectly, but the mission clock showed 56 minutes remaining before Czech security reached Lawrence's team, and no alternative solution had emerged that offered any hope of success. Chen was caught between the possibility that Bora was a security risk trying to exploit the crisis and the reality that she might be the only person who could prevent 3 operatives from being captured or killed. "Quin," Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of the decision she was struggling to make, "I need you to understand that the pattern of behavior my staff has identified raises serious questions about your motivations and objectives. Your unauthorized preparation, your access to classified information, your development of operational capabilities, all of this suggests that you may have been planning for opportunities that haven't been officially presented to you." "The only opportunity I've been planning for," Bora replied, "is the chance to save the lives of fellow operatives when conventional methods aren't sufficient. Everything I've done has been in service of this organization's mission, even if it wasn't part of my official duties." But as she looked around the command center at faces that had shifted from skepticism to open suspicion, Bora realized that her months of preparation had become evidence against her. The very capabilities that qualified her for the extraction mission were being used to disqualify her from attempting it. Time was running out for Lawrence's team, and the organization's most qualified rescue option was being rejected not because of operational concerns, but because excellence had been mistaken for treachery. The command center had reached a stalemate that was becoming more dangerous with each passing minute. Director Chen stood at the tactical display, her eyes moving between the mission clock showing 51 minutes remaining and the faces of her staff, who were split between those who viewed Bora as a potential security threat and those who recognized that she might be their only viable option for saving Lawrence's team. The secure communication link crackled with an urgent update. From Prague. Lawrence's voice, carefully controlled but carrying an edge of desperation, reported that Czech security forces had completed their sweep of the 6th floor and were beginning to establish positions for their assault on the 7th floor. "We've got maybe 40 minutes before they reach our position," she said. "Request immediate guidance on extraction protocols." Deputy Director Walsh's voice came through the video link with the bureaucratic caution that had kept him successful in intelligence administration for 2 decades. "Chen, I need to emphasize that authorizing Quin for this operation would violate every protocol we have for personnel security and operational safety. Even if her capabilities are legitimate, her unauthorized preparation raises questions about her judgment and reliability that we can't ignore during a crisis." But Crawford raised a practical concern that cut through the procedural objections. "Director, what's our alternative? We've spent 30 minutes analyzing conventional approaches, and none of them offer any realistic chance of success. If we continue debating security protocols while Lawrence's team gets captured, we'll have saved ourselves from taking a risk while guaranteeing the worst possible outcome." Bora watched the debate unfold around her, understanding that her fate And Lawrence's team were being decided by people who were weighing theoretical risks against immediate realities. She had spent months preparing for exactly this type of situation, but her preparation was being used as evidence that she couldn't be trusted to execute the mission she'd trained for. "I need to make something clear," she said, her voice cutting through the debate with a quiet intensity that made everyone stop talking. "In 48 minutes, 3 experienced operatives are going to be captured or killed while we debate whether my qualifications are legitimate. I can save their lives using capabilities that no one else in this room possesses, but only if you authorize me to act while there's still time to reach them." Anderson shook his head with the frustration of someone who had seen too many operations fail because of poor decision-making under pressure. "Quin, you're asking us to bet everything on theories that have never been tested under hostile conditions. Even if your infiltration plan is technically sound, extraction operations require split-second decision-making and adaptability that comes only from experience. One mistake, one unexpected complication, and everyone dies. One mistake in our current approach guarantees that everyone dies," Bora replied. "Lawrence's team has no conventional escape route. Check security will find them within the hour. The only question is whether we authorize an extraction attempt that might save them, or continue analyzing approaches that definitely won't work." The weight of command pressed down on Director Chen as she realized that every option available to her carried unacceptable risks. Authorizing Bora's mission violated security protocols and risked losing 4 operatives instead of 3. Refusing authorization guaranteed the loss of 3 operatives and potentially catastrophic damage to European intelligence cooperation. There was no safe choice, no decision that didn't require accepting responsibility for consequences that could haunt her career and conscience for decades. Rodriguez attempted to find middle ground that might preserve both operational effectiveness and institutional caution. "What if we authorize Quin to attempt the infiltration, but require her to maintain constant communication with the command center? We could guide her through unexpected complications and abort the mission if conditions become too dangerous. Communication protocols would compromise the stealth advantages that make this approach viable," Bora explained. "The Ministry building security systems are designed to detect electronic transmissions that don't follow authorized patterns. Maintaining contact with the command center would trigger the same monitoring systems that conventional infiltration methods can't avoid." Peterson raised the concern that crystallized the institutional resistance Bora was facing. "Even if we accept that she has the technical capabilities for this mission, we're talking about trusting the lives of 3 experienced operatives to someone who's never been tested under fire. Leadership under extreme pressure requires qualities that can't be learned from studying building schematics or practicing climbing techniques in a gymnasium." "Which is exactly why this might work," Crawford said, surprising everyone by shifting his position. "Check security is prepared for conventional rescue attempts by experienced operatives using proven techniques. They're not prepared for someone who approaches the problem from a completely different angle, using methods that don't exist in their threat assessment protocols." The mission clock showed 46 minutes remaining when Director Chen made the decision that would define her career and determine the fate of 4 people whose lives hung in the balance. She looked at Bora with an expression that combined desperation, hope, and the terrible weight of command responsibility. "Quin," she said, "I'm authorizing you to attempt this extraction under the following conditions. You have exactly 40 minutes to reach Lawrence's team and extract them from the building. If you're not clear of the target area by then, we abort. And you extract yourself immediately. You'll carry an emergency beacon that you'll activate only if the mission fails catastrophically. And you'll accept full responsibility for the consequences of your actions, understanding that this decision is being made against the recommendation of senior staff." The command center fell silent as the implications of the decision settled over everyone present. Bora felt a mixture of relief, terror, and determination as she realized that she was about to attempt something that everyone expected to fail, but which might be the only chance to save 3 lives. "I understand, Director," she said. "I'll bring them home." As she turned to leave the command center and begin her preparation for the mission, Bora heard Walsh's voice from the video link, carrying the bureaucratic disclaimer that would protect the organization if everything went wrong. "Let the record show that this operation is being conducted against the recommendations of Senior Staff and Deputy Director Walsh, who advised against authorizing unqualified personnel for high-risk extraction operations." But the record would also show that when conventional wisdom offered no solutions, someone had been willing to risk everything on the possibility that unconventional approaches might succeed where proven methods had failed. The mission clock showed 44 minutes remaining when Bora left the command center to begin the most dangerous 44 minutes of her life. Bora's equipment preparation took exactly 6 minutes, a process she had rehearsed dozens of times in her apartment, but never under the pressure of knowing that 3 lives depended on perfect execution. From her personal storage locker, she retrieved a custom kit that looked like standard maintenance equipment, but contained infiltration gear she had been accumulating for months. The lightweight climbing harness could be concealed beneath her standard issue jacket. The modified communication device operated on frequencies that wouldn't trigger the ministry building's security monitoring. The specialized tools were disguised as routine maintenance equipment that would pass casual inspection but could be used for lock manipulation, ventilation access, and emergency extraction procedures. Her approach to the Prague Ministry building began with a 20-minute drive through Vienna's diplomatic district to a pre-positioned vehicle that would take her across the Czech border using credentials that identified her as a technical consultant for European telecommunications infrastructure. The cover story would withstand routine inspection, but wouldn't survive detailed scrutiny, which meant she had to reach Prague, complete the extraction, and return before anyone investigated her presence in Czech territory. The ministry building stood in Prague's government quarter like a fortress designed to intimidate visitors and protect secrets. Its neo-Baroque facade concealed security systems that represented decades of advancement in protecting high-value intelligence targets. Every conventional approach had been analyzed and countered by security consultants who understood how experienced operatives thought and moved. But Bora wasn't approaching the problem like an experienced operative. Her route to the building avoided the obvious surveillance zones by using underground utility corridors that connected to the ministry's original foundation systems. The entrance she had identified was a maintenance access point that had been forgotten during security upgrades, a remnant of the building's 1920s construction that existed in architectural drawings, but not in modern security assessments. The utility tunnel was exactly as cramped and uncomfortable as her research had suggested. Bora moved through 300 meters of underground passage, her modified equipment allowing her to navigate by feel while maintaining the silence that kept her presence undetected. The route required her to crawl through spaces barely wide enough for her small frame, confirming that her approach would have been impossible for operatives with conventional physical profiles. Accessing the ministry building's basement required bypassing a security door that had been installed during the 1970s renovation, but which used locking mechanisms that Bora's specialized tools could manipulate. The process took 4 precious minutes, during which she remained acutely aware that discovery would end not just her mission but potentially her life. Once inside the building's infrastructure, Bora began the most technically challenging part of her infiltration. The route to the 7th floor required navigating through maintenance corridors that existed within the building's walls, climbing vertical shafts that had been designed for utility access, and moving through spaces that required absolute precision. To avoid triggering vibration sensors that monitored the building's structural integrity, her grandmother's Mountain guide training proved invaluable as she climbed through the building's hidden vertical passages. The techniques Marija had taught her for moving through limestone caves translated perfectly to navigating architectural spaces that required balance, efficiency, and the kind of body awareness that came from years of practice in challenging environments. The 7th floor access point was concealed behind a ventilation grate that appeared to be permanently sealed, but which could be opened from the inside, using leverage techniques that Bora had developed through months of studying the building's original construction specifications. As she emerged into the corridor where Lauren's team was trapped, she realized that her theoretical preparation was about to be tested against the reality of extraction under hostile conditions. Lauren's surprised expression when Bora appeared beside her was worth the months of dismissive comments and bureaucratic resistance. "Quin? How the hell did you get here?" she whispered, her voice carrying the incredulity of someone who had given up hope of rescue just minutes before. "Through routes that don't exist in any security assessment," Bora replied quietly. "We have 31 minutes to extract your team before check security reaches this floor. I'll guide you through passages that will take us directly to the building's exterior without triggering any monitoring systems." The extraction process required moving Lauren's 3-person team through infiltration routes they had never encountered, using techniques they had never trained for, under time pressure that left no margin for error. But as Bora guided them through the building's hidden infrastructure, Lauren began to understand that her rescuer's unconventional approach was precisely what made success possible. The check security forces continued their systematic sweep of the building, unaware that their targets were moving through passages that existed parallel to the spaces being searched. Bora's route avoided every monitoring system, bypassed every checkpoint, and utilized architectural features that security planners had never considered vulnerable. As they descended through the building's concealed infrastructure toward the basement extraction point, Lauren realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in her 15 years of intelligence operations. Someone with no official field experience was executing a rescue mission that seasoned operatives had deemed impossible, using capabilities that conventional training never developed. 20-6 minutes after entering the ministry building, Bora lead Lauren's team through the utility tunnel that would take them to safety. Behind them, check security forces were still searching the 7th floor for prisoners who had vanished like ghosts, leaving no trace of their presence or their miraculous escape. The extraction through Prague's underground utility network tested every skill that Bora had developed during her months of preparation. Leading 3 experienced operatives through passages designed for maintenance access required constant adaptation, as the route presented challenges that her theoretical planning couldn't have anticipated. Lauren's team had been trained for conventional extraction scenarios, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for navigating cramped tunnels while maintaining the absolute silence that kept them invisible to overhead security monitoring. Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, struggled with claustrophobia as they crawled through passages barely wide enough for single-file movement. Peterson, despite his technical training, found himself relying completely on Bora's guidance through infrastructure that existed outside his operational knowledge. The most dangerous moment came when they encountered an unexpected obstacle, a section of the utility tunnel that had been partially collapsed during recent construction work. The passage was blocked by debris that made their planned route impossible, and the sound of approaching maintenance crews meant they couldn't backtrack without risking discovery. Bora's response demonstrated why her unconventional preparation had been so valuable. Instead of panic or indecision, she immediately identified an alternative route through a parallel passage that connected to the ministry building's storm drainage system. The route required technical climbing skills that Lauren's team possessed but had never used in urban infiltration scenarios. "Follow my movements exactly," Bora whispered as she led them through a vertical shaft that connected the utility level to the storm drains. The handholds are stable, but the spacing requires precise foot placement. Don't look down and don't rush. Laurent watched in amazement as the young woman, who had been dismissed as a technical coordinator, demonstrated climbing techniques that would have challenged experienced mountaineers. Bora moved through the shaft with the fluid efficiency of someone who had spent years developing skills that her colleagues never knew existed. The storm drainage system presented different challenges that tested Bora's knowledge of Prague's underground infrastructure. The route to their extraction point required navigating through tunnels that varied in size and condition, some dating from the medieval period and others representing modern engineering projects. The passages were mapped in city planning documents that Bora had studied, but experiencing them firsthand revealed complexities that no architectural drawing could convey. Rodriguez injured his ankle during a difficult transition between tunnel systems, creating a crisis that threatened to compromise the entire extraction. Conventional protocols would have required aborting the mission or leaving the injured operative behind. But Bora's approach was based on adaptability rather than rigid procedures. She quickly assessed Rodriguez's condition and developed a support system that allowed him to continue moving while distributing his weight between Peterson and modified handholds that she created using equipment from her infiltration kit. The solution wasn't elegant, but it was effective, precisely the kind of improvisation that her months of preparation had been designed to enable. The exit point required the most technically challenging part of the extraction. Accessing the surface from Prague's storm drainage system meant navigating through a vertical shaft that terminated in a concealed location 3 blocks from the ministry building. The shaft was 40 feet deep and equipped with maintenance ladders that were corroded and potentially unreliable. Bora tested each rung before trusting her weight to it, then guided Laurent's team through the climbing sequence that would bring them to safety. The process was methodical and time-consuming, but it was also invisible to the security forces that were still searching for them inside the ministry building. As they emerged into a Prague alley that was empty except for routine civilian traffic, Laurent realized that they had accomplished something that would be difficult for even experienced operatives to believe. They had escaped from one of Europe's most secure government buildings using infiltration routes that existed outside conventional tactical knowledge, guided by someone whose capabilities had been completely underestimated by everyone who knew her. The extraction vehicle was positioned exactly where Bora had planned, disguised as a maintenance truck that would attract no attention as it transported them back across the Czech border. As they settled into the concealed passenger compartment, Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. "Quin," he said, "I've been doing this work for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. How did you know those passages existed? How did you learn to navigate them so precisely?" "I prepared for the possibility that conventional methods might not be sufficient," Bora replied simply. "And I studied Prague's infrastructure until I understood it better than the people who built the security systems." Laurent, who had been silent during most of the extraction, finally spoke as they crossed into Austrian territory. "Director Chen needs to know that what happened today wasn't luck or accident. You executed a mission that required skills and knowledge that took years to develop. The question is why you developed them without anyone knowing." Bora looked through the vehicle's rear window at Prague disappearing behind them. "Because I knew that someday lives might depend on someone being ready for the impossible. Today was that day." The mission clock that had started at 44 minutes showed 8 minutes remaining when they crossed the Austrian border. They had completed an extraction that everyone had considered impossible, using methods that no security assessment had ever contemplated, guided by someone whose capabilities had been hidden beneath the surface of bureaucratic dismissal. As Vienna's skyline appeared ahead of them, Bora realized that her unauthorized action had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. But the most challenging part of her mission was still ahead, convincing an organization built on conventional wisdom that unconventional approaches might be worth recognizing and developing. The European Intelligence Coordination Center's landing pad had never seen anything like the scene that unfolded at 12:34 p.m. on what had started as an ordinary Tuesday morning. Director Chen stood with her senior staff, watching in disbelief, as the maintenance vehicle that had departed Vienna 4 hours earlier returned carrying not just Bora Quin, but Laurent's entire team alive, uninjured, and having accomplished an extraction that every expert in the building had deemed impossible. Laurent was the first to emerge from the vehicle, her expression showing the kind of stunned amazement that came from surviving an experience that defied professional understanding. She walked directly to Director Chen, her voice carrying an intensity that made everyone within earshot stop talking. "Director," she said, "I need to report that Specialist Quin has just executed the most sophisticated infiltration and extraction operation I've witnessed in 15 years of intelligence work. She accomplished what our entire senior staff said couldn't be done, using capabilities that none of us knew existed." Rodriguez and Peterson followed, both showing signs of their underground journey, but neither displaying the trauma that typically accompanied narrow escapes from hostile territory. Rodriguez, despite his injured ankle, managed a grin as he approached Marcus Anderson. "You should have seen her, Marcus," he said. "She moved through that building like it was her personal playground. Passages we didn't know existed, routes that bypassed every security system, techniques that would have been impossible for anyone trained in conventional methods." The command center staff who had spent the morning debating whether to authorize Bora's mission found themselves struggling to process what they were hearing. The quiet technical coordinator, who had been viewed as a potential security risk, had not only succeeded in her unauthorized operation, but had accomplished something that challenged fundamental assumptions about operational capabilities and training. Requirements. Bora herself was the last to emerge from the vehicle, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who was still processing the magnitude of what she had accomplished. Her equipment showed signs of the underground journey. Her jacket was torn, her hands were scraped from climbing through building infrastructure, and her boots were covered with the distinctive grime of Prague's utility tunnels. But her expression showed something that no one in the intelligence center had ever seen from her before: the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested under the most extreme conditions and had proven equal to the challenge. As she approached Director Chen, there was no trace of the nervous uncertainty that had characterized her interactions with authority figures throughout her time at the organization. "Director," she said, her voice steady and professional, "Laurent's team has been successfully extracted from Prague. Czech security forces are still conducting their search of the ministry building and have no indication that any infiltration occurred. The operation was completed without diplomatic complications or intelligence exposure." Chen found herself in the unprecedented position of having to acknowledge that the most successful extraction operation in recent organizational history had been accomplished by someone who had been considered unqualified to attempt it. The institutional resistance that had characterized the morning's debate seemed absurd in the face of results that exceeded every expectation. "Quin," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of admiration and bewilderment, "I need to understand how you accomplished something that our most experienced operatives said was impossible. Your success today challenges everything we thought we knew about operational capabilities and personnel assessment." Deputy Director Walsh's voice came through the secure communication link, carrying the bureaucratic caution that had opposed the mission, but which now had to reconcile with its spectacular success. "Agent Quin, while I'm relieved that the extraction was successful, I need to understand the full scope of the capabilities you demonstrated today. Your unauthorized preparation clearly extended far beyond what anyone in the organization suspected." Crawford stepped forward with the question that Everyone was thinking, but few were willing to ask directly. Bora, you just accomplished something that required years of specialized training and operational experience. How did you develop these capabilities without anyone knowing? And why didn't you share this information with your supervisors? Bora looked around the circle of colleagues who had spent months dismissing her potential in hours, debating whether she could be trusted with operational responsibilities. Her answer was simple and devastating in its implications for how the organization identified and developed talent. I developed these capabilities because I believe they might someday be necessary for missions that conventional approaches couldn't handle, she said. I didn't share them because every time I tried to contribute operational insights, I was told that technical staff should focus on technical duties. Today proved that organizational effectiveness requires capabilities that don't fit traditional categories. The silence that followed her response was profound. Laurent, who had spent the morning trapped in Prague and the afternoon being rescued by someone everyone had underestimated, broke the tension with an observation that would reshape how the Intelligence Center thought about talent development. Director, she said, what happened today suggests that we've been making systematic errors in how we assess operational potential. Bora's success wasn't luck or accident. It was the result of preparation that was more thorough than anything our conventional training provides. The question isn't why she developed these capabilities in secret. The question is why our organization failed to recognize and develop them openly. As the debriefing continued, it became clear that Bora's unauthorized action had accomplished more than saving 3 lives and preventing an international incident. It had demonstrated that the organization's careful hierarchy and proven methods, while effective for conventional challenges, might be blind to unconventional solutions that could expand their operational capabilities. Director Chen found herself facing a decision that would define her leadership and potentially transform how European intelligence services approach talent development and operational innovation. The woman who had been dismissed as a technical coordinator had just proven that conventional wisdom about capabilities and qualifications might be dangerously limited. Quin, Chen said finally, I want you to know that what you accomplished today will be studied and analyzed for years to come. You've challenged fundamental assumptions about how we identify operational talent and develop specialized capabilities. The question now is how we build on what you've demonstrated. As the crowd began to disperse and the formal debriefing process began, Bora realized that her unauthorized action had succeeded in ways she had never anticipated. She had saved Laurent's team and prevented an international crisis, but more importantly, she had proven that limitations were often institutional rather than individual. The quiet technical coordinator, who had been laughed at for her amateur skills, had landed like a ghost from an impossible mission, demonstrating that sometimes the most effective approach was the one that no one expected from someone they had decided wasn't qualified to try. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.